the Dreamweaver's cottage. The path through the woodland grew softer with each step, as though the earth itself remembered how to welcome weary travelers home. Moss cushioned the walking stones, and the last light of evening filtered through the leaves in shades of amber and pale gold. The air smelled of pine needles and distant rain, cool and clean against the skin. Somewhere overhead, a bird sang its final song of the day, unhurried, melodic, fading into the gathering quiet. The trees here grew older and kinder, their branches spreading wide like open arms. Roots twisted gently across the path, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and the forest floor was carpeted in soft needles that barely whispered underfoot. Everything here moved slowly. Even the breeze seemed to pause between moments, as if it too were settling down for the night. And then, just as the path began to curve around an ancient oak, the cottage came into view. It sat in a small clearing, nestled between the trees as though it had grown there naturally, like a mushroom or a flowering vine. The walls were made of honey-colored stone, weathered and warm, with wooden beams that had darkened to the color of chestnuts. The roof was thick with moss and sloped gently, its edges soft and rounded, and a thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney in a slow, lazy spiral. Golden light glowed from the windows, not bright, but gentle like candlelight filtered through amber. The glow spilled onto the grass outside, pooling in soft circles that seemed to hum with warmth. Lanterns hung on either side of the door, their flames small and steady, flickering only slightly in the evening air. The door itself was painted a deep, calming blue, the color of the sky just after sunset. A wreath of dried lavender and wheat hung upon it, and beneath the wreath, carved into the wood in careful, flowing letters, were the words, "Dreams woven here." The traveler, whose footsteps had carried them through the forest without thought or plan, stood at the edge of the clearing and simply breathed. The cottage radiated peace. It was the kind of place that felt as though it had been waiting, not urgently, but patiently, the way a favorite chair waits by the fire or a soft blanket waits at the foot of a bed. No one knew quite how they had found the path. It was not marked on any map, nor spoken of in any town. But those who walked the woods with a quiet heart and a weary mind sometimes found their feet turning toward it, as though the forest itself were gently guiding them home. And so the traveler stepped forward, crossing the soft grass, feeling the warmth from the windows reaching out like an invitation. The lanterns flickered as they approached, their light steady and welcoming. The traveler paused at the door, one hand raised, and before they could knock, the door opened softly inward. Warmth spilled out, gentle, golden, scented with herbs and wool and something faintly sweet, like honey stirred into warm milk. From within came the sound of a quiet hum, low and rhythmic, almost like a lullaby sung without words. And standing just inside, framed by the soft glow of the hearth beyond, was the Dreamweaver. She was smaller than expected, and older, though it was hard to say exactly how old. Her hair was silver white, braided loosely over one shoulder, and her eyes were kind, pale gray like early morning mist. She wore a long, simple dress the color of twilight, layered with a shawl that shimmered faintly, as though woven from moonlight itself. Her hands were gentle, weathered by years of careful work, and her smile was soft, the kind of smile that asked nothing and offered everything. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice quiet and warm, like the crackling of the fire behind her. Come in and rest." The traveler stepped inside, and the door closed behind them with a soft, final sound, not a shutting out, but a shutting in, a gathering of warmth and safety. The interior of the cottage was even lovelier than the outside had promised. The room was small, but it did not feel cramped. The ceiling beams were low and dark, hung with bundles of dried herbs, lavender, chamomile, rosemary, that filled the air with their soft, calming scent. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with jars of all shapes and sizes. Some of the jars glowed faintly from within, soft blues and silvers and golds, as though they held captured starlight. Others were filled with spools of thread that shimmered in the firelight, colors that seemed to shift and change as the light touched them, deep indigo, pale rose, soft green like new leaves. In the center of the room stood a loom. It was larger than any loom the traveler had ever seen, made of smooth, dark wood that gleamed in the firelight. The frame stretched upward, nearly touching the ceiling, and across it were strung threads of every imaginable color, some fine as spider silk, others thick and soft as wool. The threads seemed to glow faintly, as though they held light within them, and they moved ever so slightly in the warmth of the room, swaying like seaweed in a gentle current. To one side of the loom was a spinning wheel, smaller and older, its wood worn smooth by countless hours of use. Beside it sat a basket filled with raw fibers, soft white wool, gleaming silk, and something else, something that shimmered like moonlight and seemed to have no weight at all. The hearth crackled softly on the far wall, its fire low and steady, the flames dancing in shades of orange and gold. Above it hung a copper kettle, and beside it, on a small wooden table, sat 2 cups and a teapot, steam curling gently from its spout. The floor was made of wide wooden planks, smooth and warm underfoot, covered here and there with woven rugs in soft, muted colors, dusty blue, pale gray cream. A rocking chair sat near the hearth, draped with a thick woolen blanket, and beside it, a small stool piled high with cushions. Everything in the cottage seemed to hum with quiet purpose. Everything had its place. Everything was exactly as it should be. The dream weaver gestured gently toward the rocking chair. "Sit," she said softly. "The night is long, and there is time for everything." The traveler moved slowly toward the chair, feeling the warmth of the fire reaching out to greet them. They sank into the cushions, and the chair rocked gently backward, cradling them like a parent might cradle a sleepy child. The wool blanket was soft and heavy, and the traveler pulled it over their lap, feeling the tension in their shoulders begin to ease. The dream weaver moved about the cottage with unhurried grace, her movements slow and deliberate. She lifted the teapot from the table and poured steaming liquid into the 2 cups, golden and fragrant, smelling of chamomile and honey and something else, something that seemed to carry the scent of quiet nights and distant stars. She handed 1 cup to the traveler, and they wrapped their hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into their palms. The dream weaver settled into the stool beside the loom, cradling her own cup, and for a long moment they simply sat together in silence. Outside, the forest had grown dark. The birds had finished their songs. The wind had stilled. And inside the cottage, the fire crackled softly, the threads on the loom swayed gently, and the world grew smaller and warmer and infinitely safe. The tea was warm and sweet, with a subtle flavor that seemed to change with each sip. First honey, then chamomile, then something floral and light, like the memory of summer evenings. The traveler drank slowly, feeling the warmth spread through their chest and down into their limbs, gentle as a tide coming in. The dream weaver sipped her own tea in silence, her eyes soft and distant, as though she were listening to something the traveler could not yet hear. The firelight played across her face, casting shadows that moved like water, and her hands rested gently on her lap, fingers loosely curled around the cup. After a time, though time here seemed to move differently, stretching and softening like honey in the sun, the dream weaver set her cup down on the small table beside her. She rose slowly, moving toward the loom with the same unhurried grace, and the traveler watched, feeling no need to speak, content simply to observe. The dream weaver ran her fingers along the threads stretched across the loom, and they hummed softly at her touch, a sound like wind through tall grass or the distant ringing of bells. Each thread seemed to respond to her, glowing a little brighter, swaying a little more. "Every dream begins as a thread," the dream weaver said softly, her voice blending with the quiet sounds of the cottage. "Some are spun from starlight, some from moonbeams, others from the breath of sleeping flowers or the songs of night birds. Each one is different. Each one carries its own light." She moved to the spinning wheel and touched it gently, setting it turning with the lightest pressure of her hand. The wheel spun slowly, steadily, its rhythm like a heartbeat, and as it turned, it made a soft whirring sound that seemed to sink into the walls and floor, becoming part of the cottage itself. The traveler's eyes grew heavier, but not with exhaustion, with peace. The kind of heaviness that comes when the body finally remembers it is safe, when the mind finally sets down the burdens it has been carrying. The dream weaver reached into the basket beside the spinning wheel and drew out a handful of fibers. They were pale and silvery, almost translucent, and they seemed to shimmer in the firelight as though they were not quite solid, not quite real. She fed them gently onto the spindle, and the wheel turned, pulling the fibers into a fine, glowing thread. "This," she said quietly, is the thread of a peaceful dream, one without worry, without fear, a dream of walking through meadows in early morning, when the grass is cool and wet with dew, and the sky is soft with the first light of day. The thread grew longer as the wheel turned, winding onto the spindle in perfect, even loops. The dream weaver's hands moved with practiced ease, guiding but never forcing, allowing the thread to find its own way. Some people, she continued, her voice a gentle murmur, carry heavy thoughts with them into sleep. Their minds turn and turn, like wheels that cannot stop. They worry about yesterday. They worry about tomorrow. They forget that the night is a gift, a time to rest, a time to let go. She paused, her hands stilling on the wheel, and she looked toward the traveler with those kind, misty eyes. "That is why I weave," she said simply, "so that those who need rest might find it, so that the night might be soft for them." The wheel began to turn again, slow and steady, and the thread continued to grow. The sound of it was hypnotic, rhythmic and constant, like waves lapping at the shore or the ticking of a grandfather clock in a quiet hall. The traveler felt their breathing slow to match the rhythm of the wheel. In and out, soft and steady. The warmth of the fire wrapped around them like a blanket, and the scent of herbs filled the air, calming and sweet. When the thread was finished, the dream weaver lifted it gently from the spindle and held it up to the light. It glowed softly, a pale silver blue, and it seemed to pulse faintly, as though it held a heartbeat of its own. She carried it to the loom and began to thread it through the frame, weaving it carefully among the other threads already in place. Her fingers moved with a dancer's grace, over and under, pulling gently, never rushing. The loom seemed to sing as she worked, a soft, wordless melody that rose and fell like breathing. "A dream," she said as she wove, "is not something that happens to you. It is something that is made. Carefully, gently, with intention. Each thread is chosen. Each color is placed with care. And when the dream is finished, it is released into the night to find the one who needs it most." The traveler watched, mesmerized, as the dream weaver's hands moved through the threads. The colors blended and shifted, silver into blue, blue into soft lavender, lavender into pale gold. Patterns emerged and faded, like clouds drifting across the sky, and the dream began to take shape. It was not a picture exactly, but something more, an impression, a feeling woven into fabric. The traveler could almost see it, a meadow at dawn, mist rising from the ground, the sun just beginning to warm the horizon. There were wildflowers, soft and nodding in a gentle breeze. There was the sound of birds waking, their songs quiet and tentative. There was peace, deep and unshakable, woven into every thread. The dream weaver worked slowly, never hurrying, and the traveler felt no impatience. There was something deeply soothing about watching her, something that quieted the restless thoughts and stilled the anxious heart. It was enough simply to sit and watch and breathe. After a time, the dream weaver paused and stepped back from the loom, tilting her head slightly as she studied her work. She nodded once, satisfied, and then moved to the shelves along the wall. The jars there glowed softly in the dim light, each one labeled in careful, flowing script. The traveler's eyes wandered over the labels, reading them slowly, dreams of flying, dreams of home, dreams of childhood gardens, dreams of quiet rain, dreams of reunions, dreams of forgiveness. The dream weaver reached for one of the jars, a small one, made of blue glass, glowing faintly from within. She opened it carefully, and a soft light spilled out, gentle and cool, like moonlight on water. "This," she said, "is the essence of calm, a distillation of quiet moments. It is made from the breath of sleeping children, the sigh of wind through willow trees, the sound of distant waves. A single drop woven into a dream makes all the difference." She took a small dropper from the shelf and drew out a single, shimmering drop. She carried it back to the loom and let it fall onto the woven threads. Where it touched, the fabric seemed to soften and glow, and the colors deepened, becoming richer, more luminous. The dream weaver smiled, a small, private smile, and returned the jar to its place on the shelf. "There," she said softly. "Now it is ready. When the night is deep enough, I will release it, and it will find its way to the one who dreams of meadows." She returned to her stool beside the fire and picked up her cup of tea, now cooled but still sweet. The traveler did the same, sipping slowly, feeling the warmth settle into their bones. Outside, the forest was silent. Inside, the fire crackled gently. The loom stood quiet and patient, holding its unfinished dreams. And the dream weaver sat in her chair, her hands resting gently on her lap, her eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of the night. The traveler felt their own eyes growing heavier, The world seemed softer now, the edges blurred and gentle. Everything was warm. Everything was safe. And the night stretched out ahead, long and peaceful, like a road leading home. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, soft and red like the hearts of roses. The dream weaver rose slowly from her stool and moved to the hearth, selecting 2 small logs from a woven basket nearby. She placed them on the embers with care, adjusting them gently until they caught, and small flames began to dance upward, casting new shadows that swayed and flickered across the walls. The traveler watched the flames, feeling their warmth on their face, and found that their breathing had fallen into rhythm with the crackling of the wood. Each breath came a little slower than the last, a little deeper, a little more peaceful. The dream weaver returned to the shelves and began to move along them slowly, her fingers trailing across the jars as though greeting old friends. Each jar held something different. Some were filled with light, others with what looked like colored smoke that swirled and drifted within the glass. Some contained tiny, glowing orbs that floated like fireflies. Others held what appeared to be nothing at all, yet they seemed to hum with a presence that could be felt if not seen. "Would you like to know," the dream weaver asked softly, not turning from the shelves, "how dreams are gathered?" The traveler made a small sound of assent, too comfortable to form words, and the dream weaver nodded as though she had expected this. "Some dreams," she began, her voice quiet and measured, "come from the world itself. From moments of beauty that are too brief to hold. A sunset that takes the breath away, the first snow of winter, the way light falls through leaves on a summer afternoon. These moments are too precious to fade completely, and so they find their way here, to be woven into dreams for those who need reminding that beauty exists." She lifted a jar filled with golden light, warm and bright as honey in sunlight. "This," she said, "is the dream of a perfect autumn day. The air crisp and cool, the leaves turning red and gold, the smell of wood smoke and apples. A day when everything feels exactly as it should." She set the jar back gently and moved to another, this one filled with soft blue light that seemed to shimmer like water. "This is the dream of rain on a quiet afternoon. The sound of it against the windows. The way it makes everything feel close and safe. The permission it gives to do nothing but rest and watch and listen." She continued down the shelf, touching each jar briefly, and as she did, she spoke of what they contained. Dreams of gardens in bloom, dreams of beloved pets long gone but not forgotten, dreams of laughter shared with old friends, dreams of songs half-remembered from childhood. The traveler felt something loosening in their chest, some tightness they had not even known was there. Each dream the dream weaver described seemed to touch something deep and quiet, something that had been waiting to be remembered. The dream weaver moved to a different shelf, one where the jars were smaller and their light more subtle, almost shy. "These," she said, her voice even softer now, "are the dreams I make for those who are hurting, for those whose days are heavy and whose nights are long. These dreams are gentle. They ask nothing. They simply hold space for rest." She touched a jar that glowed with the palest lavender light. "A dream of floating," she murmured, "of being held by warm water, weightless and safe, with nothing to do but exist. No thoughts, no worries, only the gentle rocking of waves and the feeling of being supported, always supported, never alone." The traveler felt tears prick at their eyes, though they could not have said why. The dream weaver's words seemed to reach some part of them that had been tired for so very long, and the acknowledgement of that tiredness was itself a kind of comfort. The dream weaver turned from the shelves and crossed the room to a small wooden chest that sat beneath one of the windows. She opened it carefully, and soft light spilled out, illuminating her face from below. Inside were bundles of dried flowers, tied with thread in different colors, white for chamomile, purple for lavender, pale pink for rose petals. She selected a bundle of lavender and brought it to the table, where she began to strip the small dried blossoms into a shallow wooden bowl. Her movements were meditative, each blossom falling with a soft whisper, and the scent that rose from the bowl was calming and sweet, like summer fields and grandmother's linen closets. "Lavender," she said, "for peace, for the quieting of anxious thoughts, for the softening of the boundary between waking and sleeping." When the bowl was half full, she added a few dried chamomile flowers, their tiny white petals delicate as snow, and then a pinch of something else, rose petals perhaps, or something more elusive, something that smelled faintly of honey and starlight. She carried the bowl to the hearth and set it on a small trivet near the fire. The warmth began to release the fragrance more fully, and it filled the cottage, wrapping around the traveler like an invisible shawl. The dream weaver settled back into her stool, and picked up a small basket from the floor beside her. Inside were more fibers for spinning, soft wool in shades of cream and gray, silk that caught the light, and that strange, shimmering substance that seemed to be made of moonlight itself. She selected a handful of the moonlight fibers and began to feed them onto the spinning wheel. The wheel turned, slow and steady, and the fibers twisted together, becoming thread that glowed with a soft, silvery luminescence. "This thread," she said as she worked, "is for a different kind of dream. A dream of the night sky, of lying in soft grass and watching stars wheel overhead, of feeling small in the best way, small and safe and part of something vast and beautiful." The wheel hummed as it turned, and the thread grew longer, winding onto the spindle in perfect, even loops. The sound was constant and soothing, and the traveler found their eyes drifting closed, then opening again, then drifting closed once more. "It is all right to rest," the dream weaver said gently, though she did not look up from her work. "The night is long. There is time for everything. Time for watching. Time for sleeping. Time for the slow drift between the two." The traveler let their eyes close fully this time, but they could still hear everything: the crackle of the fire, the hum of the spinning wheel, the soft whisper of the dream weaver's breathing. They could still feel the warmth of the blanket across their lap, the solidness of the chair beneath them, the weight of their own body settling more deeply into rest. They were not quite asleep, but not quite awake either. They floated in that gentle space between, where thoughts become softer and time becomes fluid, where the world outside fades and the world inside grows vast and quiet. The dream weaver continued to spin, her hands moving with the same steady grace, and the thread continued to grow, silvery and bright. And outside, the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, one by one, patient and eternal, keeping watch over the forest and the cottage and all the dreamers sleeping beneath their light. The wheel turned. The fire crackled. The night deepened. And everything was exactly as it should be. Time passed in the way it does in dreams, without urgency, without edges. The traveler floated in the warmth of the cottage, aware of sounds and sensations, but not quite tethered to them. The spinning wheel continued its gentle song, and the dream weaver worked on, her presence a quiet comfort, asking nothing, offering everything. After a time, minutes or hours, it was impossible to say, the dream weaver finished spinning the moonlight thread and lifted it carefully from the spindle. It coiled in her hands like liquid silver, glowing softly in the firelight, and she carried it to the loom with the reverence one might show a sleeping child. She began to weave it into the fabric already there, and as she did, the dream began to change. Where before there had been a meadow at dawn, now there was something deeper, a sense of vastness, of open sky, of infinite space. The threads shimmered and shifted, creating patterns that seemed to move even when the weaver's hands were still. The traveler's eyes opened slightly, watching through half-closed lids, and they saw the dream taking shape, felt it, almost, as though they were already dreaming it. The cool grass beneath their back, the immensity of the night sky above, the stars wheeling slowly overhead, ancient and constant. The feeling of being held by the earth itself, safe and small and utterly at peace. The dream weaver's fingers moved through the threads with practiced certainty, never hesitating, never second-guessing. Each movement was deliberate and gentle, and the loom seemed to respond to her touch, the wood creaking softly, the threads humming their approval. "Every person who comes to the edge of sleep," the dream weaver said quietly, her voice blending with the sounds of her work, "carries something with them. Worries from the day, plans for tomorrow, regrets about yesterday. The mind does not want to let go. It thinks that by holding on, it is keeping us safe. But sometimes, the safest thing we can do is release our grip." She paused in her weaving and looked toward the traveler, her eyes kind and knowing. "That is what dreams are for," she said. "They give the mind something else to hold, something softer, something that does not demand or frighten or exhaust. A dream is a gift of temporary forgetting, a small mercy offered in the night." The traveler felt the truth of this settle into their bones. How many nights had they lain awake, turning thoughts over and over like stones in their hands, unable to set them down? How many times had sleep felt like something to be achieved rather than something to be received? The dream weaver returned to her weaving, and the traveler watched the threads move through her fingers, over and under, back and forth, building something beautiful from nothing more than light and intention. When the section of dream was complete, the dream weaver secured the final threads and stepped back, surveying her work with a quiet satisfaction. The woven fabric glowed softly on the loom, and within it, the traveler could see layers upon layers, The meadow, the stars, and beneath them, something else, something that felt like comfort itself, woven into every fiber. The dream weaver moved to a small cabinet near the window and opened its doors. Inside were spools of ribbon in every color, and she selected one, a deep midnight blue, soft as velvet, and brought it back to the loom. She began to edge the woven dream with the ribbon, her stitches small and even, binding the dream so it would hold its shape when released. A dream must be finished properly, she explained as she worked, her needle moving in and out with a gentle rhythm. It must be sealed so that it does not unravel, so that it reaches the dreamer whole and intact, exactly as it was intended. The needle flashed in the firelight, small and bright, and the ribbon wove itself around the edges of the dream like a frame around a painting. The dream weaver's hands moved with the same unhurried grace she brought to everything, and watching her, the traveler felt their own breathing slow even further, their heartbeat settling into a deep, steady rhythm. When the binding was complete, the dream weaver set down her needle and lifted the finished dream from the loom. It was surprisingly small when gathered in her hands, no larger than a silk scarf, but it seemed to contain worlds within it. The fabric shimmered and shifted, alive with light and color, and it made a soft sound as it moved, like wine through leaves or water over smooth stones. She carried it to the table and laid it out carefully, smoothing it with gentle hands. Then she moved to the shelves and selected several jars, the blue one that contained essence of calm, a golden one labeled essence of contentment, and a small green one marked essence of deep rest. One by one, she opened the jars and let a single drop fall onto the dream. Where each drop touched, the fabric absorbed it, and the colors deepened and glowed. The dream seemed to breathe, expanding slightly and then settling, and a feeling of profound peace emanated from it, palpable even from across the room. The traveler felt it wash over them, a wave of tranquility so complete that their entire body seemed to soften, tension they had been holding for days, weeks, perhaps years, finally releasing its grip. The dream weaver smiled, a small, private smile of satisfaction, and folded the dream carefully, once and then again, until it was small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. She held it gently, as though it were something precious and fragile, and then she moved to the window and opened it slightly. Cool night air drifted in, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth and distant water. The stars were bright outside, scattered across the sky like seeds in dark soil, and the moon hung low on the horizon, round and full and glowing with soft silver light. The dream weaver held the folded dream up to the window, and for a moment she simply stood there, her face turned toward the night sky, her lips moving in what might have been a whisper or a prayer or simply a breath. Then she opened her hands. The dream lifted from her palms as though it had been waiting for permission, unfolding as it rose, growing larger and lighter, becoming translucent, becoming light itself. It drifted upward on the night air, floating gently, carried by currents the traveler could not see, and as it rose, it began to glow more brightly, shimmering like a small star. Higher and higher it climbed, past the tops of the trees, into the open sky, until it was indistinguishable from the stars themselves. And then it was gone, released into the night, on its way to find the dreamer who needed it most. The dream weaver stood at the window for a long moment, watching the place where the dream had disappeared, and then she closed the window gently and turned back to the room. "And so it goes," she said softly. "Every night, dreams are woven and released. Every night, someone somewhere receives the gift of peaceful sleep. The work is never finished, but that is all right. There is a comfort in the constancy of it, in knowing that no matter what has happened during the day, the night will come, and with it, the possibility of rest." She returned to her stool by the fire and lowered herself into it with a soft sigh. The traveler watched her, feeling a deep gratitude for this woman and her quiet, essential work, for the care she brought to each dream, for the love woven into every thread. The fire crackled. The cottage hummed with quiet contentment. And outside, the night deepened, patient and eternal, holding space for all the dreams yet to be woven, all the rest yet to be found. The cottage settled into a deeper quiet now, as though the releasing of the dream had brought with it a hush, a reverence. The fire burned low and steady, its flames smaller now but no less warm, and the shadows on the walls swayed gently like dancers moving to music only they could hear. The dream weaver sat in silence for a time, her hands resting gently in her lap, her eyes half closed. She looked peaceful, content, like someone who has completed good work and knows it. The traveler watched her, feeling no need to speak, no need to disturb the quiet that had grown between them like something alive and precious. After a while, The dream weaver opened her eyes fully and looked toward the traveler with that same gentle smile. "There are other dreams to weave tonight," she said softly. "But there is no rush. The night is long, and patience is part of the craft. Would you like to help?" The traveler felt a flutter of something, not quite excitement, for that would have been too sharp, too bright for this soft space, but a gentle stirring of interest, of willingness. They nodded, a small movement, and the dream weaver's smile deepened. "Good," she said. "Come then. There is always room for another pair of hands in the work of dreaming." The traveler rose from the rocking chair slowly, feeling the blanket slide from their lap, and crossed the room to where the dream weaver waited by the spinning wheel. Their legs felt heavy, but not unpleasantly so, heavy with relaxation, with the kind of tiredness that comes from being truly, deeply at ease. The dream weaver gestured to a small stool beside her own, and the traveler sat, folding their hands in their lap, waiting. "First," the dream weaver said, "we must choose what kind of dream we wish to make. Tell me, what does the world need tonight? What comfort? What gift?" The traveler thought for a moment, and as they did, an image came to them, soft and indistinct at first, but growing clearer. A memory of childhood, of being small and safe, of being read to in a warm bed while rain fell outside. The feeling of being cared for. The feeling of being held. "A dream of being safe," the traveler said quietly, their voice barely more than a whisper. "A dream of being loved." The dream weaver nodded slowly, her eyes warm with understanding. "Yes," she said, "those are good dreams. Important dreams. We will make one together." She reached into the basket beside the spinning wheel and began to select fibers, soft white wool, fine and clean, and silk in pale colors, cream and blush, and the softest gray. She added to these a handful of something that looked like spun sugar, translucent and delicate, and a few strands of that moonlight substance, just enough to add a subtle glow. "These," she said, holding the fibers up to the light, "will form the foundation. Wool for warmth, silk for softness, the sugar thread for sweetness, the moonlight for magic, for the feeling that this dream is something special, something just for the dreamer." She handed half the fibers to the traveler, and they felt their softness, their lightness, like holding a cloud or a breath of wind. "Now," the dream weaver said gently, "we begin." She showed the traveler how to tease the fibers apart, how to fluff them gently until they were soft and airy, ready to be spun. Her movements were slow and deliberate, and the traveler followed her example, working the fibers with careful fingers, feeling them separate and expand. It was soothing work, repetitive and simple, requiring just enough attention to keep the mind occupied, but not so much that it became stressful. The traveler's thoughts quieted as they worked, and they found themselves falling into a rhythm, pull and tease, the fibers growing fluffier in their hands. When the fibers were ready, the dream weaver began to feed them onto the spinning wheel. She set the wheel turning with a gentle push, and it began its familiar hum, that soft, constant sound that had become as much a part of the cottage as the crackling fire or the smell of herbs. "The key," the dream weaver said as she worked, her voice low and soothing, "is not to force. Let the wheel do the work. Guide the fibers gently, but trust them to become what they need to become. Dreams are like that. They know their own shape. We only help them find it." The traveler watched as the fibers twisted together under the dream weaver's hands, becoming thread, becoming something with purpose and form. The wheel turned, steady and sure, and the thread wound onto the spindle in perfect loops. After a time, the dream weaver paused and gestured for the traveler to take over. "Here," she said. "You try." The traveler hesitated for only a moment, then reached forward and took the fibers in their hands. They fed them onto the spindle the way they had seen the dream weaver do, and the wheel continued to turn, pulling the fibers gently from their fingers. At first, their movements were uncertain, and the thread came out uneven, thick in some places and thin in others. But the dream weaver only nodded encouragingly. "That's right," she said. "Don't worry about perfection. Even imperfect threads make beautiful dreams. Sometimes especially so. It is the irregularities that make something feel real, feel honest." The traveler continued, and gradually they found their rhythm. The wheel hummed. The fibers twisted. The thread grew. And as they worked, the traveler felt something shift inside them, a loosening, a lightening. The simple, repetitive motion was meditative, almost hypnotic, and their breathing slowed to match the turning of the wheel. In and out, round and round, pull and release, pull and release. The thread that formed was soft and glowing, pale as morning light, and shot through with tiny glimmers where the moonlight fibers had woven themselves in. It was beautiful in its simplicity, and the traveler felt a quiet pride in having helped create it. When the spindle was full, the dream weaver stopped the wheel and lifted the thread carefully. She held it up to the light, examining it with a critical but kind eye, and then she nodded, satisfied. "This will make a lovely dream," she said warmly. "Full of gentleness and care. Exactly what we intended." She carried the thread to the loom and began to set it in place, threading it through the frame alongside the other threads already there. The traveler rose and followed, standing beside her, watching as she worked. "Now we weave," the dream weaver said. "This is where the dream truly takes shape. Where separate threads become one fabric. Where intention becomes reality." Her hands moved over the loom with the same grace they brought to everything, and the thread they had spun together began to weave itself into the pattern. The traveler could see it taking form, not an image exactly, but a feeling, a sense of warmth and enclosure and unconditional love. "A dream of safety," the dream weaver murmured as she worked. "Of being tucked into a warm bed. Of hearing the rain fall outside and knowing you do not have to go out into it. Of feeling small hands held in larger ones. Of knowing, deep in your bones, that you are loved. That you belong. That you are exactly where you are meant to be." Each word seemed to weave itself into the fabric along with the thread, and the dream glowed softly on the loom, full of light and warmth. The traveler felt tears prick at their eyes again, moved by the simple beauty of it, by the care taken to craft something so tender. The dream weaver continued to weave, her movements slow and sure, and the traveler stood beside her, present and peaceful, watching the dream grow thread by thread, moment by moment, until it was whole. The dream grew slowly on the loom, taking shape like morning mist gathering in a valley. The dream weaver's hands moved with their constant, unhurried grace, and the traveler stood beside her, simply watching, simply being present in this quiet act of creation. The cottage around them seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the work, the fire crackling in time with the passing of the shuttle, the walls settling with soft creaks that matched the swaying of the threads. Everything was connected, everything part of the same gentle pulse. When at last the weaving was complete, the dream weaver stepped back and let out a soft breath of satisfaction. The dream lay across the loom like a blanket of light, pale and warm and shimmering with all the care that had been woven into it. The traveler could feel what it held: comfort, safety, the feeling of being cherished. "Now," the dream weaver said softly, "we finish it." She moved to the shelves, and this time, she gestured for the traveler to join her. Together they stood before the rows of glowing jars, and the dream weaver's fingers hovered over them, considering. "For a dream of safety and love," she mused aloud, "we need certain essences. What do you think? What does safety feel like to you?" The traveler thought for a moment, searching their own memories, their own experiences of feeling truly safe. Images came, a hand on their shoulder, steady and sure. A door closed against the storm. The sound of familiar laughter in another room. The weight of a quilt, heavy and warm. "It feels like being held," the traveler said quietly. "Like having weight, like boundaries that protect." The dream weaver nodded, understanding in her eyes. She reached for a jar filled with deep amber light, warm as honey, as old wood, as earth. "Essence of groundedness," she read from the label. "Yes, this is perfect." She handed the jar to the traveler, and they held it carefully, feeling its warmth through the glass. The dream weaver selected two more, one with soft rose gold light labeled Essence of Tenderness, and another with pale blue light that seemed to pulse gently, labeled Essence of Trust. "These three together," the dream weaver said, "will give the dream everything it needs. Groundedness to provide weight and stability. Tenderness to make it gentle. Trust to make it feel safe." They carried the jars back to the table where the finished dream now lay, removed from the loom and spread out like a small constellation of threads and light. The dream weaver opened the first jar, the amber one, and drew out a single drop with her dropper. She held it suspended for a moment, letting the firelight catch it, and then she let it fall onto the dream. Where the drop touched, the fabric seemed to deepen, to gain substance and weight. The colors grew richer, more anchored, and a feeling of solidity emanated from it. The traveler felt it in their own body, a settling, a sense of being more firmly present in their own skin. The dream weaver handed the second jar to the traveler. "You place this one," she said gently. The traveler took the jar of rose gold light with slightly trembling hands, not from nervousness but from the significance of the gesture. They opened it carefully and drew out a single, shimmering drop. It hung from the dropper like a tiny star, and the traveler held it over the dream, then let it fall. The drop landed softly, and where it touched, the dream seemed to soften, to become more yielding, more gentle. The hard edges blurred, and a feeling of warmth spread through the fabric, like a hand stroking hair or a voice murmuring comfort. The dream weaver smiled and opened the final jar. Together, they watched as she released one last drop, the pale blue essence of trust. It fell slowly, almost in slow motion, and when it touched the dream, everything came together. The colors blended and harmonized, the light pulsed once and then settled, and the dream became complete. It lay on the table, glowing softly, and from it emanated such a profound sense of peace and safety that the traveler felt their knees weaken. They wanted to wrap themselves in this dream, to carry it always, to never be without its comfort. Every dream we release, the dream weaver said quietly, is a gift we give away. It is not ours to keep, but in the making of it, we receive its blessing too. You have felt this dream's essence. Part of it will stay with you, even after it finds its intended dreamer. The traveler understood. They had helped create this, had poured their own longing for safety into its threads, and in doing so, had received some measure of that safety themselves. The dream weaver folded the dream with the same reverence she had shown before, her movements slow and ceremonial. When it was small enough to hold, she cradled it in her palms and moved to the window once more. The night outside had deepened. The moon had risen higher, smaller now but brighter, and the stars seemed to have multiplied, filling the sky with their patient light. The forest was silent, wrapped in its own dreams, and the air that drifted through the open window was cool and clean, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. The dream weaver held the folded dream up to the window, and the traveler stood beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the dream, close enough to hear the dream weaver's whispered words. "Find the one who needs you," she breathed. "Find the heart that aches for safety. Find the soul that has forgotten what it feels like to be loved. Go gently. Go with blessing." She opened her hands. The dream lifted, unfolding as it rose, growing translucent and bright. It drifted upward on the night breeze, turning slowly, catching the moonlight, and as it climbed higher, it began to glow more intensely, as though the sky itself were welcoming it home. The traveler watched until they could no longer distinguish it from the stars, and even then they continued to look, feeling the cool air on their face, feeling the vastness of the night, feeling small and safe and part of something much larger than themselves. The tea cooled slowly in their hands, and the traveler drank it in small sips, letting each mouthful linger on their tongue before swallowing. The flavor seemed to change as they drank, sometimes honey-sweet, sometimes floral, sometimes simply warm and comforting in a way that had no name. The dream weaver set her cup down and rose from her stool, moving to a different part of the cottage that the traveler had not yet noticed. In the far corner, partially hidden by shadow, stood a tall wooden cabinet with glass doors. Through the glass, the traveler could see more shelves, but these held books, dozens of them, their spines worn and faded, their pages thick with age. The dream weaver opened the cabinet doors, and they creaked softly, a sound like an old friend clearing their throat. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles that the traveler could not quite make out, and finally selected a volume bound in deep blue cloth, its edges soft with handling. She brought it back to her stool and opened it carefully, the pages whispering as they turned. The traveler could see that it was not printed but handwritten, each page filled with careful script and faded ink. "This," the dream weaver said softly, "is the dream journal. Every dream I weave, I record here. Who it was for, what it contained when it was released. Not their names, of course, I never know names, but I write down what they needed, what the world needed on that particular night." She turned the pages slowly, and the traveler caught glimpses of entries, each one written in that same careful hand. A dream of reunion, essence of joy and essence of recognition, released on the new moon, for the one who has lost touch with an old friend. A dream of a garden in spring, essence of renewal and essence of hope, released at dawn, for the one whose winter has been too long. A dream of laughter, essence of lightness and essence of play, released during the dark of the moon, for the one who has forgotten how to smile. The dream weaver's finger traced down the page as she read, and her voice was soft and rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. "There is comfort in keeping record," she said, "in knowing that the work continues, night after night, year after year. That no dream is wasted. That somewhere always someone is receiving the gift of peaceful sleep." She turned to a blank page and picked up a pen that lay on the table, an old fountain pen with a worn wooden handle. She dipped it in a small inkwell and began to write, her letters forming slowly and deliberately. A dream of a meadow at dawn, and a dream of starlit skies. Essence of calm, contentment, and deep rest. Released on a clear night when the moon was high. For the one who dreams of peace. And then beneath that, a dream of safety and love. Essence of groundedness, tenderness, and trust. Created with help. Released on the same night. For the one who has forgotten what it feels like to be held. She blew gently on the wet ink, waiting for it to dry, and then closed the book with a soft sound. She returned it to its place in the cabinet and came back to her seat, settling into it with a quiet sigh. There will be more dreams to weave before morning, she said. But we have time. The deepest part of the night is still ahead. That is when the most important dreams are needed, when sleep is elusive and the world feels darkest. Those are the hours when dreams matter most. The traveler nodded, understanding. They had known those hours, 3 in the morning, for in the morning, when the mind races and the body aches with exhaustion but sleep will not come. The hours when every worry feels magnified, when every fear seems insurmountable. What kind of dreams do you make for those hours? The traveler asked, their voice barely above a whisper. The dream weaver considered for a moment, her eyes distant. Dreams of deep water, she said finally. Dreams of floating in darkness, held by something vast and gentle. Dreams of falling softly, endlessly, with no fear of landing. Dreams that ask nothing of the dreamer except that they let go, that they stop trying, that they surrender to the pull of sleep. She rose again and moved to a different set of shelves, these ones holding jars that glowed with deeper, darker colors, indigo and violet and the blue-black of midnight. She touched them gently, one after another, as though greeting them. These essences are stronger, she said, more potent. Essence of deep sleep. Essence of letting go. Essence of surrender. They are used sparingly, only when truly needed, only for those whose minds will not quiet on their own. She selected one jar, deep purple, its light pulsing slowly like a heartbeat, and brought it to the table. She did not open it, but simply held it, letting the traveler see it, feel its presence. This is essence of stillness, she said quietly, distilled from the moment between breaths. The pause before the heart beats again. The silence between notes in a song. It is the most precious essence I have, because stillness is what we all seek, whether we know it or not. Not excitement. Not distraction. Just stillness. Just peace. The traveler stared at the jar, mesmerized by its slow, pulsing light. They could feel something emanating from it even through the glass, a quieting, a calming, as though the jar itself were teaching their body how to be still. The dream weaver returned it to its shelf with the same reverence one might show a religious artifact, and then she turned back to the traveler with a gentle smile. But those dreams are for later, she said. For now we have simpler work. Gentler dreams. Dreams that ease rather than silence. Dreams that comfort rather than erase. She moved to the basket of fibers again, and began selecting new materials, soft grays and pale greens, colors that reminded the traveler of early morning fog, of lichen on stone, of dove's feathers. She added to these some cream-colored wool, and a few strands of silver thread that caught the light. A dream of a quiet morning, the dream weaver said as she worked, her hands moving through the fibers with practiced ease. A dream of waking slowly, without alarm, without urgency. Of lying in bed and watching dust motes drift through sunlight. Of having nowhere to be and nothing to do. Of time stretching out like a cat in a warm patch of light. She began to card the fibers, drawing them across a small wooden paddle studded with fine wire teeth. The movement was rhythmic, soothing, and the fibers aligned themselves under her hands, becoming smooth and even. The traveler watched, their eyes growing heavier with each pass of the cards, each soft sound of fiber against fiber. The rocking chair swayed gently beneath them, moving with their breathing, and the blanket across their lap felt heavier now, warmer, like a living thing settling in for sleep. The dream weaver continued her work, preparing the fibers for spinning, and her voice rose and fell in a gentle murmur, speaking of mornings and rest and the gift of unhurried time. The words blended with the sounds of the cottage, the crackling fire, the soft whisper of fibers, the gentle creaking of the chair, until everything became one continuous lullaby, soft and eternal and infinitely safe. The traveler's eyes closed, then opened slightly, then closed again. They were not quite asleep, but they were no longer quite awake either. They floated in that in-between place, that gentle threshold, where the dream weaver's voice was both close and far away, where the cottage was both real and dreamlike, where everything was exactly as it should be. And the dream weaver continued to work, her hands never stopping, preparing the next dream, the next gift, the next offering of peace to a world that needed it so desperately. The wheel would turn again soon. The loom would receive new threads. The night would deepen and soften, and eventually give way to dawn. But for now there was only this: the warmth of the fire, the comfort of the chair, the sound of gentle breathing, and the knowledge that somewhere in this small cottage at the edge of the woods, dreams were being made with love, released with blessing, and received with gratitude by those who needed them most. The fibers were ready now, soft and aligned, and the dream weaver carried them to the spinning wheel. She settled onto her stool with the quiet grace of someone who had performed this action thousands of times, who knew exactly how her body should sit, how her hands should rest, how her feet should press the treadle. She began to spin, and the wheel turned with its familiar hum, that constant, soothing sound that seemed to resonate not just in the air but in the bones, in the blood, in the very rhythm of breath itself. The fibers twisted and merged, becoming thread, and the thread wound itself onto the spindle in perfect, even coils. The traveler watched through half-closed eyes, their vision soft and blurred, and the spinning wheel seemed to glow in the firelight, seemed almost to pulse with life. The dream weaver's hands moved in the flickering shadows, appearing and disappearing, weaving in and out of the light like spirits engaged in some ancient, sacred dance. "When I was young," the dream weaver said softly, her voice blending with the wheel's hum, "I could not sleep. Night after night, I would lie awake, my mind racing, my body restless. I tried everything: warm milk, counting sheep, lying perfectly still. Nothing worked. The wheel continued to turn, steady and constant. One night, I went walking in the forest, hoping the cool air might tire me. I walked for hours, and just as the sky was beginning to lighten, I found this cottage. It was empty then, or I thought it was empty. But when I stepped inside, there was a woman sitting at this very wheel, spinning thread that glowed like moonlight. The dream weaver paused in her spinning, her hands stilling, and for a moment the only sound was the crackling of the fire. She looked at me, the dream weaver continued, and she smiled. And she said, "You've come for a dream." It wasn't a question. She knew. She gave me tea and sat me in that chair where you sit now, and she wove a dream while I watched. And when she released it, she told me it was for me, that I should go home and sleep, and the dream would find me. The dream weaver's hands began to move again, slowly, and the wheel resumed its turning. I did as she said. I went home. I lay down in my bed, and I slept for 12 hours without waking once. When I finally woke, I felt different, lighter, as though some burden I had been carrying had been gently lifted while I slept. She drew more fiber onto the spindle, her movements unhurried. I came back the next night, wanting to thank her. But when I arrived, the cottage was empty. Truly empty this time. No fire in the hearth. No thread on the loom. Just dust and silence. I thought perhaps I had dreamed it all. But on the table, I found a note. It said, "The cottage is yours now. The work continues. Weave dreams for those who cannot sleep, and you will never lack for purpose or peace." The traveler felt the weight of this story settle over them like another blanket, warm and heavy. They understood, somehow, that they were part of a long chain, a tradition passed from one sleepless soul to another, each one learning to give what they had once needed to receive. "I have been here ever since," the dream weaver said softly, "spinning and weaving, night after night, year after year, and I have never had trouble sleeping again. Because when you spend your nights making peace for others, peace finds its way into your own heart as well." The thread was finished now, pale gray-green and silver, glowing softly in the dim light. The dream weaver lifted it from the spindle and carried it to the loom, and she began to thread it through, weaving it among the other strands already in place. The loom sang as she worked, each thread humming its own note, and together they created a chord that was almost musical, almost a song. The dream weaver's hands moved in their steady rhythm, over and under, pull and release, over and under, pull and release, and the dream began to take shape. The traveler could see it forming, could feel what it contained. A quiet morning, soft light through curtains, the warmth of blankets, the luxury of time. No urgency, no demands, just the gentle gift of waking slowly, of easing into the day like sliding into warm water. "This dream," the dream weaver murmured as she worked, "is for someone who wakes in panic. Someone whose first thought each morning is of everything they must do, everything they have forgotten, everything they have failed to complete. This dream will teach them, if only for one night, what it feels like to wake without fear, to wake with softness." Her fingers moved through the threads, and the fabric grew, row by row, a meditation in textile form. The traveler's breathing had slowed to match the rhythm of the weaving, and they felt as though they were being woven into the dream as well, becoming part of its fabric, part of its piece. Time became liquid. Minutes might have been hours. Hours might have been minutes. The fire burned low, and the dream weaver rose briefly to add another log, moving so quietly that she barely disturbed the stillness. The new wood caught, and fresh flames danced upward, casting new patterns of light across the walls. When the dream weaver returned to the loom, she brought with her a small wooden box that the traveler had not noticed before. She opened it, and inside were tiny objects: a feather, a smooth stone, a dried flower, a piece of sea glass worn soft by waves. "Sometimes," she said, "a dream needs more than thread and essence. Sometimes it needs a talisman, a small piece of the waking world to anchor it, to make it feel real." She selected the feather, pale gray, soft as down, and wove it carefully into the dream, securing it with a few stitches of silver thread. Where the feather touched the fabric, it seemed to give the dream weight and texture, seemed to make it more solid, more believable. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Now it is complete." She finished the edges with her needle and thread, binding the dream so it would hold its shape, and then she lifted it from the loom. It was small and light, barely there, but it pulsed with gentle life, with the promise of peaceful mornings. The dream weaver moved to the shelves and selected 2 jars, one filled with soft golden light labeled Essence of Ease, and another with pale pink light labeled Essence of Gentle Waking. She opened each in turn and let a single drop fall onto the dream, and with each drop the dream seemed to sigh, to settle, to become more fully itself. She folded it carefully and carried it to the window. The night outside was at its deepest now. The moon had crossed the sky and begun its descent toward the horizon, and the stars burned with their coldest, clearest light. The forest was utterly still, wrapped in sleep, and the air that came through the open window was cool and clean and smelled of pine and distant water. The dream weaver held the dream up to the night, and her lips moved in that same whispered blessing. Then she opened her hands, and the dream lifted, unfolding as it rose, becoming translucent, becoming light, drifting upward on invisible currents until it was lost among the stars. She stood at the window for a long moment, her face turned to the sky, and then she closed the window gently and turned back to the room. The traveler had slipped deeper now into that threshold place. Their breathing was slow and even, their body completely relaxed, their mind quiet as snow falling on a windless night. They were aware of the dream weaver moving about the cottage, aware of the fire's warmth and the chair's gentle rocking, but these things felt distant, felt like part of a dream themselves. The dream weaver returned to her stool and picked up her cup of tea, now cold but still fragrant. She sipped it slowly, sitting in the quiet, and her eyes were soft with contentment. 3 dreams woven and released. The night wearing on. The wheel and the loom standing ready. And somewhere out there, beneath the vast canopy of stars, 3 dreamers receiving the gifts that had been made for them with such care, such love, such patient devotion. The cottage hummed with satisfaction. The fire crackled its approval. And the night deepened further still, drawing everything down into stillness, into rest, into the profound peace that comes when the world finally remembers how to be quiet. The dream weaver set down her empty cup and rose from her stool, moving about the cottage with the quiet purpose of someone tending to evening rituals. She checked the fire, adjusting a log so it would burn more evenly. She straightened the jars on the shelves, turning them so their labels faced outward. She folded a stray piece of cloth and placed it in a basket near the door. Each small action was performed with the same mindful attention she brought to her weaving, as though every gesture mattered, as though care itself were a form of prayer. The traveler watched through barely open eyes, seeing her move through the cottage like a shadow, like candlelight, barely disturbing the air as she passed. There was something deeply soothing about watching someone go about their work with such quiet competence, such gentle certainty. The dream weaver moved to a small shelf near the hearth and took down a wooden box, different from the one that held talismans. This box was larger, darker, its wood polished smooth by years of handling. She brought it to the table and opened it carefully, and the traveler glimpsed what lay inside: bundles of dried herbs tied with twine, small stoppered bottles, a mortar and pestle made of smooth gray stone. "The deepest part of the night approaches," the dream weaver said softly, though whether she was speaking to the traveler or to herself or to the cottage itself, it was impossible to say. "This is when the difficult dreams are needed, the dreams that carry medicine, the dreams that heal." She selected several bundles of herbs and began to strip their leaves into the mortar, lavender for peace, mugwort for dreaming, passionflower for quieting anxiety. She added a pinch of dried rose petals and something else, something that looked like tiny silver seeds that caught the firelight. Poppy seeds, she said, noticing the traveler's drowsy attention. Not enough to harm, only enough to help the mind release its grip, to help it remember that it is safe to let go. She began to grind the herbs with the pestle, moving it in slow circles, and the motion was hypnotic, round and round, the sound soft and rhythmic, like waves washing over sand. The scent that rose from the mortar was calming and slightly sweet, with an undertone of earth and green growing things. As she worked, she hummed, a melody without words, rising and falling like breath, like wind, like the turning of the wheel. The tune seemed to have no beginning and no end, but circled back on itself, each phrase leading naturally into the next, an eternal loop of sound that wrapped around the listener like silk. The traveler felt themselves sinking deeper into the chair, their body becoming heavier, more boneless, as though they were slowly melting into the cushions. Their thoughts, which had been quiet already, became quieter still, not absent, but soft, like voices heard through walls, like conversations happening in another room. The dream weaver finished grinding the herbs and tapped the pestle against the edge of the mortar, a soft crystalline sound. She poured the powder into a small silk sachet and drew the strings tight, then hung it from one of the beams overhead, near the others that already dangled there like sleeping bats. "This," she said, "will scent the air while we work. Will help soften the edges. Will make the space between waking and sleeping easier to cross." Already the traveler could smell it, subtle at first, then growing stronger, a fragrance that seemed to reach deep into the chest, loosening something there, some tension that had been held for so long it had become invisible, forgotten. The dream weaver returned to the spinning wheel and selected new fibers from the basket, deep indigo and soft purple, colors of twilight, of the space between day and night. She added to these threads of silver and something that shimmered darkly, like water under stars. "A dream of deep water," she said as she began to spin, the wheel turning, the thread forming. "For someone who cannot stop thinking, whose mind turns and turns like a mill wheel, grinding the same thoughts over and over until they are dust, until they are pain." The thread grew on the spindle, dark and luminous, and the dream weaver's voice continued, soft and steady, blending with the hum of the wheel. "This dream will take them down, down, down into deep water. Water that is warm and safe and holds them gently. They will sink without fear, letting the water close over their head, and they will find that they can breathe there, that they have always been able to breathe there. And in the deep water, there is no sound, no light, no thought, only the slow, steady rhythm of their own heartbeat, and the feeling of being cradled, supported, held." The traveler could feel it, the sensation of sinking, of letting go, of being held by something vast and gentle. Their breathing had slowed even further, each breath coming long and deep, their chest rising and falling like slow waves. The dream weaver spun on, and the thread grew darker, richer, shot through with silver like moonlight filtering down through deep water. When the spindle was full, she lifted the thread and carried it to the loom, and she began to weave. This time, she did not speak as she worked. She let the loom do the talking, let the threads sing their wordless song. Her hands moved in the firelight, steady and sure, and the fabric that grew beneath them was like night itself made tangible, soft and deep and full of quiet stars. The traveler watched, or perhaps dreamed they watched, or perhaps simply felt the dream being woven, felt it taking shape not on the loom but inside their own chest, inside their own mind. They felt themselves sinking into deep water, felt the cool embrace of it, the way it muffled all sound, all urgency, all fear. Down and down and down, the water above them growing darker, the world above growing distant. And no fear, no panic, only a profound sense of relief, of finally being allowed to stop, to rest, to simply be held. The dream weaver wove on, and time stretched and thinned until it was barely there at all. The fire burned low, casting the room in deeper shadow, and the cottage seemed to contract slightly, becoming smaller, more womb-like, more safe. When the dream was finished, the dream weaver did not immediately cut it from the loom. Instead, she sat before it for a long moment, her hands resting on the fabric, her head slightly bowed. She might have been praying, or simply listening, or perhaps she was letting the dream tell her if it was complete, if it contained everything it needed to contain. Finally, she nodded once and reached for her scissors. She cut the dream free carefully, and as she lifted it from the loom, it seemed to pulse with dark light, seemed to breathe with a slow, steady rhythm all its own. She carried it to the table and laid it out, smoothing it gently. Then she moved to the shelf where the strongest essences were kept, the ones in the darkest jars, the ones used only when truly needed. She selected 3. The purple jar containing essence of stillness, a deep blue jar labeled essence of surrender, and a black jar, almost invisible in the shadows, labeled simply essence of peace. One by one, she opened them and let a single drop fall onto the dream. And with each drop, the dream seemed to deepen, to become more potent, more powerful. The fabric absorbed the essences and began to glow from within, a soft, dark glow like embers hidden under ash. The dream weaver stood over it for a moment, her hands hovering above it, and then she folded it with the utmost care, as though it were something precious beyond measure, as though it held within it the answer to suffering itself. She carried it to the window and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cooler now, carrying the scent of the hour before dawn, damp earth, sleeping flowers, the faint promise of morning still hours away. She held the dream up to the darkness, and her voice when she spoke was barely a whisper. Find the one who is drowning in thought. Find the one who cannot surface. Take them down into your depths, and there, in the deep water, let them finally rest. She opened her hands. The dream unfurled slowly, darkly, like ink spreading through water. It rose on the night air, barely visible against the darkness, marked only by the faint shimmer of silver within it. It drifted upward and outward, and then it was gone, swallowed by the night, on its way to find the dreamer who needed it most desperately. The dream weaver stood at the window, the cool air washing over her face, and she let out a long, slow breath. Then she closed the window and turned back to the room. The cottage was darker now, quieter, as though the releasing of that dream had taken something from the air, had stilled it further. The traveler was barely aware of anything now. Only the warmth, only the darkness, only the slow, steady pull toward sleep. The dream weaver moved through the shadows and came to stand beside the rocking chair. She looked down at the traveler with infinite kindness, infinite understanding, and she reached down and adjusted the blanket, tucking it more snugly around their shoulders. Rest now, she whispered. The work is nearly done. The night is nearly through. Rest and let the dreams find you. And the traveler, who had been holding on by the thinnest thread to waking, finally let go. Sleep came like water filling a vessel, slowly and completely, until the traveler was submerged in it, held by it, no longer separate from it. They drifted in darkness that was not frightening but comforting, darkness that was soft as velvet, warm as bathwater, safe as a mother's arms. And yet, some part of them remained dimly aware of the cottage, of the fire's gentle crackling, of the dream weaver's quiet movements, of the sense of being watched over, protected, held in a space where nothing harmful could reach them. The dream weaver moved about her work with even greater quietness now, as though she knew the traveler had crossed the threshold and she did not wish to disturb them. She added another log to the fire, this one smaller, slower burning, chosen to last through the remaining hours until dawn. She dimmed the lanterns until they were barely glowing, just enough light to work by, no more. She returned to the spinning wheel and selected new fibers, soft white wool and pale blue silk, colors of clouds and morning sky. She began to spin, and the wheel's hum became part of the traveler's dreaming, became the sound that their sleep moved to, that their breathing matched. The thread that formed was light and airy, barely there, and as it wound onto the spindle, it seemed to float more than coil, seemed to want to drift away on the slightest breeze. A dream of flying, the dream weaver murmured, so softly that the words were barely formed, barely spoken. Not the flying of falling, but the flying of freedom, of soaring effortlessly, arms spread wide, the wind holding you up, the earth far below and beautiful and nothing to fear. Her hands moved slowly through the fibers, drawing them out, letting them twist, guiding them onto the spindle. The rhythm was slower now, more languid, as though even the dream weaver herself were being drawn toward sleep, toward the deep quiet that fills the world in the hours before dawn. The thread grew longer, paler, more luminous. It caught what little light remained in the room and seemed to multiply it, seemed to glow with its own soft radiance. When the spindle was full, the dream weaver lifted the thread and simply held it for a moment, feeling its weight, or lack of weight, in her hands. She carried it to the loom and began to weave, and this time the work went quickly, easily, as though the thread knew where it wanted to go and was simply using her hands to get there. The fabric that formed was so light it was almost transparent, barely visible, and yet it held the suggestion of sky, of clouds, of limitless space. The dream weaver wove in silence, and the silence itself seemed to have texture, seemed to have depth. It was not empty silence but full silence, the kind that holds everything without grasping, that allows everything without demanding. The traveler floated in their sleep, and in their sleeping, they began to dream. Not a formed dream with images and narrative, but something more essential, a feeling, a sensation. The feeling of weightlessness, of being lifted, of soaring through vast open space with no effort, no fear, only the pure joy of movement, of freedom, of being untethered from the earth and all its heaviness. In the dream, they spread their arms wide and felt the wind rush past them, felt it hold them up as surely as solid ground, felt it carry them higher and higher until the world below became small and distant and beautiful in its wholeness. And somewhere in the waking world, the dream weaver smiled as she wove, as though she could sense the traveler's dreaming, as though the line between her weaving and their dreaming was not a line at all but a circle, each one feeding the other, each one making the other possible. The dream on the loom took shape, sky and cloud and endless blue, shot through with white and palest gold where the thread caught the firelight. When it was complete, the dream weaver cut it free and held it up, and it stirred in the air of the cottage, moved by currents too subtle to feel, and for a moment it seemed as though it might simply float away on its own, without any need to be released. But the dream weaver folded it gently and carried it to the table. She selected her essences with care, essence of lightness, essence of joy, essence of freedom, and let a single drop of each fall onto the dream. The fabric absorbed them and seemed to sigh, seemed to lift slightly, as though already trying to take flight. She carried it to the window and opened it one more time. The night outside had begun to change. The stars were still visible, still bright, but there was a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness, a thinning, a suggestion that somewhere beyond the horizon, dawn was beginning its slow approach. The dream weaver held the dream up to this changing darkness, and when she released it, it did not simply rise, it soared. It caught the pre-dawn air and lifted swiftly, joyfully, spiraling upward like a bird released from a cage, and within moments it was gone, vanished into the vastness of the sky. The dream weaver watched it go, and her expression was peaceful, satisfied. 5 dreams woven and released. 5 gifts given. 5 souls somewhere in the sleeping world receiving exactly what they needed. She closed the window and moved back into the cottage, and now she began to tidy, to prepare for the ending of the night. She straightened the spools of thread on the shelves. She swept a few stray fibers from the floor. She checked the jars of essence, making mental note of which ones were running low, which ones would need to be replenished. She moved to a small desk in the corner and took out the dream journal once more. She opened it to the page where she had last written and continued her record. A dream of quiet morning, essence of ease and gentle waking, a feather woven in, released when the moon was setting, for the one who wakes in panic. A dream of deep water, essences of stillness, surrender, and peace, released in the deepest hour, for the one whose mind will not rest. A dream of flying, essences of lightness, joy, and freedom, released as dawn approached, for the one who feels trapped. She set down her pen and closed the book, returning it to its place. Then she moved to the hearth and stood before the fire, holding her hands out to its warmth, and for a long moment she simply stood there, still and quiet, a figure in the firelight, a guardian of dreams, a weaver of peace. The cottage had grown even quieter, if such a thing were possible. The only sounds now were the fire's soft crackling, the traveler's slow breathing, and somewhere very distant, the first tentative song of a bird greeting the approaching day. The dream weaver turned and looked at the traveler, sleeping deeply in the rocking chair, the blanket pulled up to their chin, their face peaceful and soft in the dim light. She moved closer and knelt beside the chair, not touching, just present, just watching with those kind, misty eyes. "Soon it will be morning," she whispered. "Soon the night's work will be complete, and a new day will begin. But not yet. Not quite yet. There is still a little time for sleep. A little time for dreams. Rest, dear one. Rest and know that you are safe, that you are held, that you are loved." She reached out and very gently, barely touching, smoothed the strand of hair away from the traveler's forehead. Then she rose and moved away, back to her stool, back to her work. There was one more dream to weave. One final gift before the night gave way to day. She selected fibers in the softest colors, pale pink and cream and the faintest touch of gold, colors of sunrise, of new beginnings, of gentle hope. She began to card them, drawing them across the wooden paddle with slow, meditative strokes, and the sound was like whispered lullabies, like wind through wheat, like the distant memory of being rocked to sleep. The fibers aligned themselves under her hands, became soft and smooth and ready for spinning. And as she worked, the cottage seemed to hold its breath, seemed to gather itself for this final dream, this final offering before the night released its hold on the world. The fire burned low. The darkness outside began to thin, and the dream weaver prepared to weave the last dream of the night, a dream of awakening, gentle and gradual, a dream that would ease the transition from sleep to waking, that would carry into the day some measure of the night's peace. But there was no rush. The work would be completed in its own time. The night would last as long as it needed to last. And for now there was only this, the quiet cottage, the sleeping traveler, the weaver at her work, and the sense that everything, every thread, every moment, every breath was exactly as it should be. The fibers were ready, soft as a sigh, and the dream weaver carried them to the spinning wheel. She sat down slowly, settling into the familiar shape of the stool, and for a moment before beginning, she simply sat with her hands resting on her lap, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and deep. She was gathering herself, the traveler somehow knew, even in sleep. Gathering her intention, her focus, her love. This final dream of the night was important. It would be the bridge between darkness and light, between sleep and waking, between the deep rest of night and the gentle stirring of day. The dream weaver opened her eyes and began to spin. The wheel turned slower now than it had all night, its rhythm more languid, more spacious, as though it too were tired, as though it too were ready for rest but willing to give this one last offering before stopping. The fibers twisted together, pink and cream and gold, and the thread that formed was soft as dawn light, warm as the first rays of sun touching the earth after a long night. It glowed gently as it wound onto the spindle, and watching it, or dreaming of watching it, the traveler felt something in their chest begin to lighten, begin to lift. A dream of gentle waking, the dream weaver said, her voice barely above a breath. A dream of opening your eyes slowly, without alarm. Of the first moment of consciousness being soft, being kind. Of remembering, before anything else, that you are safe. That you have slept well. That the day ahead, whatever it holds, can be met with steadiness and calm. The wheel hummed its agreement, and the thread continued to grow, pale and luminous, carrying within it all the gentleness of dawn, all the promise of new beginning. The dream weaver spun on, and somewhere outside, beyond the cottage walls, beyond the sleeping forest, the darkness began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, incrementally, the way ice melts or flowers open or seasons turn. The black of deep night softened to indigo, indigo to violet, violet to the deep blue of pre-dawn. The first bird's song had been joined by a second, then a third. They did not sing loudly or urgently, but softly, tentatively, as though they too were still half asleep, still caught between dreaming and waking. The thread was finished, and the dream weaver lifted it from the spindle and held it to the fading darkness. It glowed in her hands, warm and alive, and she brought it to her face and breathed on it gently, as though blessing it, as though breathing into it some final essence of care. She carried it to the loom and began to weave, and her movements now were even slower than before, even more deliberate. Each pass of the shuttle, each lift of the heddle, each gentle pull of the thread, all of it done with such mindfulness that the weaving itself became a meditation, became a prayer. The fabric that formed was soft and warm, suffused with gentle light. It looked like sunrise made tangible, like the feeling of waking from good dreams with the morning sun on your face, like the first stretch of the body after deep sleep, like the quiet contentment of knowing you have rested well. The dream weaver wove on, and the cottage around her began to brighten, so gradually it was almost imperceptible. The darkness in the corners lifted. The shadows on the walls grew softer, paler. The fire, which had burned so brightly through the night, now seemed dimmer, less necessary, as natural light began to filter through the windows. The dream was nearly complete. Just a few more rows. Just a few more passes of the thread. The dream weaver's hands moved steadily, patiently, without rush or urgency. She had done this countless times, would do it countless times more. There was no need to hurry. The work would be finished when it was finished, and not a moment before. Finally, the last thread was woven in. The dream weaver secured it with careful stitches and then sat back, her hands resting on her lap, gazing at what she had made. The dream glowed softly on the loom, and from it emanated such warmth, such gentleness, that even the traveler in their deep sleep felt it, felt something in them beginning to stir, beginning to turn slowly toward waking. The dream weaver rose and cut the dream free from the loom. She held it in her hands, feeling its warmth, its lightness, and she smiled, a soft, private smile of satisfaction and love. She carried it to the table and laid it out, smoothing it gently. Then she moved to the shelves, But this time she did not reach for the jars of essence. Instead, she moved to the window and opened it wide. The air that came in was cool and fresh and carried with it the sense of morning. Dew on grass, earth waking, flowers beginning to open. The sky outside had lightened to pale gray blue, and though the sun had not yet risen, its approach was clear in the quality of the light, in the way the darkness had given way to something softer, something hopeful. The dream weaver stood at the window, breathing in the morning air, and then she turned back to the dream on the table. She did not add essences to this one. This dream needed nothing but itself, nothing but the gentleness woven into every thread, the care stitched into every seam. She picked it up and held it close to her heart for a moment, her eyes closed, and then she carried it to the window. "This one," she whispered to the lightening sky, "is for all those who will wake today. For every person who opens their eyes to a new morning. May they wake gently. May they wake with peace. May they carry into their day some small measure of the night's rest." She held the dream up to the dawn, and it caught the first pale light and seemed to drink it in, seemed to grow brighter, more luminous. And then she opened her hands. The dream unfurled and lifted, rising on the cool morning air, and as it rose, it began to spread, to expand, growing larger and larger, becoming translucent, becoming light itself. It rose above the cottage, above the trees, spreading across the sky like a gentle blanket, and for a moment the traveler, dreaming or waking, it was impossible to say, saw it covering the world, saw it settling over every sleeping person, every dreamer, offering to all of them the gift of gentle waking. And then it faded, becoming part of the dawn itself, indistinguishable from the morning light, woven into the fabric of the new day. The dream weaver stood at the window, her face turned to the growing light, and she let out a long, slow breath. The night's work was complete. 6 dreams woven and released. 6 gifts given to the world. She closed the window gently and turned back to the cottage. The fire had burned down to ash and glowing embers. The lanterns had gone out, and the room was filled now with the soft gray light of early morning, gentle and kind, asking nothing, offering everything. The dream weaver moved quietly to where the traveler slept in the rocking chair. She knelt beside them once more and looked at their peaceful face, their slow breathing, the complete relaxation of their body. "The night is ending," she whispered, "but there is no rush. Sleep as long as you need. And when you wake, know that you have been part of something beautiful, that you have helped make peace for the world, that you are loved." She rose slowly and moved to the hearth. She took down the sachet of herbs that hung from the beam and opened it, letting the contents spill into the dying fire. The herbs caught and smoldered, releasing one final drift of calming fragrance, lavender and chamomile and rose, and the scent filled the cottage like a benediction, like a final blessing. The dream weaver moved to the loom and ran her hand along its frame, feeling the smooth wood, the familiar grain. "Rest now," she said to it softly. "You have done good work." She moved to the spinning wheel and stilled its motion with a gentle hand. "Rest," she said again. She moved about the cottage, touching things gently, the shelves of jars, the basket of fibers, the table where the dreams had been prepared. To each, she offered the same quiet word, rest. And finally, she moved to her own sleeping place, a small bed in an alcove the traveler had not noticed, curtained with soft fabric the color of twilight. She drew back the curtain and sat down on the edge of the bed, her movements slow with the weight of the night's work, the good tiredness that comes from meaningful labor. She looked back at the traveler one more time, sleeping peacefully in the chair by the dying fire, and she smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, "for your company, for your help, for being here." And then she lay down, pulled a quilt over herself, and closed her eyes. The cottage settled into stillness. Outside, the birds sang more confidently now. The sky continued to lighten. And inside, 2 souls rested, the dream weaver and the traveler, both held in the gentle space between night and day, between sleep and waking, between one breath and the next. Time passed without measure in the cottage. Minutes or hours, there was no way to know, no way to tell. The traveler slept on, deeply and peacefully, held in the warmth of the chair, wrapped in the softness of the blanket, surrounded by the quiet of the cottage and the gentle sounds of morning slowly arriving. In their sleep, they dreamed, not the dreams the dream weaver had woven, but their own dreams, soft and formless, made possible by the deep rest their body had found. They dreamed of gentle things, of walking through meadows with no destination in mind, of sitting by quiet streams and watching water flow, of lying under trees and watching leaves move against the sky. There were no words in these dreams, no story, no narrative, only sensation, only feeling. The feeling of being held. The feeling of being safe. The feeling of having nothing to do and nowhere to be, and that being exactly right, exactly perfect. The cottage breathed around them, its walls creaking softly as the wood warmed with the growing light. The floor settled with small sounds, and somewhere a timber shifted, adjusting to the changing temperature, to the transition from night to day. Outside, the forest was waking fully now. More birds had joined the chorus, their songs overlapping and weaving together into a tapestry of sound that was both complex and soothing. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker began its rhythmic tapping, a slow, steady pulse that echoed through the trees. The light coming through the windows grew stronger, warmer. It was no longer the pale gray of early dawn but the soft gold of true morning, and it fell across the cottage floor in long rectangles, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily in the still air. The travelers stirred slightly in their sleep, a small movement, barely perceptible. Their hands shifted on the armrest. Their head turned slightly to one side. But they did not wake. They were still too deep, still too held by sleep's gentle grip. In her alcove, the dream weaver slept as well, her breathing slow and even, her face peaceful. Even in sleep, she seemed to carry an air of quiet contentment, as though some part of her remained aware of the good work done, the dreams released, the peace given. The cottage held them both, these two sleepers, with equal care, equal tenderness. It made no distinction between the weaver and the traveler, the teacher and the student, the one who gave and the one who received. In sleep, they were simply two beings at rest, two souls breathing in rhythm with each other and with the world around them. The fire in the hearth had gone completely out now. Only ash remained, pale gray and fine, dusted with tiny embers that no longer glowed but still held the faintest warmth. The smell of wood smoke lingered in the air, mixed with the lingering scent of herbs and the fresh coolness coming through the cracks around the windows. On the shelves, the jars of essence sat quiet and patient, their lights dimmed in the growing daylight but not extinguished. They would remain, waiting for the next night, ready to give their gifts again when darkness returned and the dream weaver took up her work once more. The loom stood empty now, its threads hanging loose and still, waiting to receive the next dream. The spinning wheel sat motionless, its treadle resting on the floor, its spindle empty. Both tools rested, their work done, their purpose fulfilled for this night at least. The dream journal lay closed on its shelf, holding within its pages the record of the night. 6 dreams made, 6 dreams released, 6 souls somewhere receiving what they needed most. The pen sat beside it, its tip cleaned and dry, waiting for the next entry, the next night's accounting. Everything in the cottage had settled into rest, into stillness. Even the air seemed to have stopped moving, seemed to hang suspended in the gentle morning light, content simply to be, to exist without purpose or motion. The travelers' breathing grew even slower, even deeper. They had passed through the lightest layers of sleep now, and descended into that profound place where rest becomes restoration, where sleep becomes healing. Their body had gone completely soft, completely heavy, all tension dissolved, all tightness released. In this deep place, time meant nothing. The concerns of the waking world seemed impossibly distant, impossibly small. There was no yesterday to regret, no tomorrow to fear. There was only this, the endless present moment, stretching out in all directions, without beginning or end. The light through the windows continued to strengthen, continued to warm. It touched the traveler's face, gentle as a hand, and they sighed in their sleep, a soft sound, barely audible but full of contentment, full of peace. Somewhere in the forest, a deer stepped carefully through the underbrush, moving with quiet grace toward a stream to drink. A squirrel chattered briefly from a high branch, then fell silent. A butterfly, one of the first of the season, drifted past the cottage window, its wings catching the light, orange and black and impossibly delicate. The world was waking, but slowly, gently, without rush or urgency. Everything took its time. Everything moved at the pace it needed to move, no faster, no slower. And in the cottage, the two sleepers remained at rest, held in that sacred space between night and day, between sleeping and waking, between one phase of life and the next. They had given the night its due. They had honored the darkness and the work that can only be done when the sun is hidden. And now they rested in the reward of that honoring, deep, dreamless, perfect sleep. The cottage held them. The forest held the cottage. The earth held the forest. And the sky held everything, vast and patient and endlessly kind. The traveler dreamed of floating in warm water, of being held without effort, of simply existing without thought or worry or need. They dreamed of being exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do, which was nothing at all except rest, except be, except breathe. And in that dreaming, in that deep and peaceful place, they found something they had been searching for without knowing they were searching. They found the gift of true rest, the gift of letting go, the gift of trusting that they were held, that they were safe, that they could stop trying and striving and pushing and simply be. The dream weaver had given them this, not through any single dream, but through the entirety of the night, through the cottage itself, through her presence and her work and her quiet, constant love. She had woven peace not just into fabric, but into the very air, into the walls, into the light itself. And now, as morning grew fuller and the day began to establish itself, both the weaver and the traveler rested in what they had created together, a space of absolute safety, absolute peace, absolute rest. The birds sang on. The light grew warmer. The forest breathed its slow, green breath. And inside the cottage at the edge of the woods, two souls slept on, held in the gentle hands of morning, cradled in the soft embrace of dreams fulfilled and work completed in peace finally found. The morning continued its slow, gentle arrival, unhurried and patient. The sun had risen fully now, though it remained hidden behind the trees, its light filtering through the branches in soft, golden shafts that moved slowly across the forest floor as the earth turned. Inside the cottage, the light had grown warm and honeyed, filling the space with a glow that seemed to come not just from the windows but from the walls themselves, from the very air. Everything looked softer in this light, gentler, as though the cottage had absorbed the peace of the night and was now radiating it back into the world. The traveler continued to sleep, their body completely at rest, their breathing so slow, and even it was barely perceptible. They had descended into the deepest layers of sleep, that place beyond dreams where consciousness dissolves completely, where the self becomes formless, boundless, part of everything and nothing all at once. In this place there was no thought, no worry, no sense of time or identity or separation. There was only being, pure, simple, complete. The traveler floated in this vast, peaceful emptiness, held by it, part of it, and they had never felt more safe, more whole, more at peace. Time passed. The sun climbed higher. The morning sounds grew fuller, birdsong and the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream, the soft whisper of wind through the trees. Life was stirring, waking, beginning its day, and it did so with such gentleness, such lack of urgency, that even the act of waking felt restful. In her alcove, the dream weaver stirred slightly. Her breathing changed, becoming a little quicker, a little lighter. Her hand moved beneath the quilt. Her eyelids fluttered. She was beginning to rise toward waking, slowly, naturally, in the way the body wakes when it has slept enough, when rest is complete. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking in the soft light, and for a moment she simply lay there, looking up at the ceiling of her alcove, at the soft fabric of the curtains, at the way the morning light filtered through. She smiled, a small, peaceful smile, and then she sat up slowly, pushing the quilt aside. She rose from her bed and moved quietly through the cottage, her bare feet making almost no sound on the wooden floor. She moved to the hearth and knelt before it, placing her hand on the stones. They were cool now, the fire long since gone out, but she could feel the residual warmth deep within them, the memory of the night's flame. She stood and moved to the shelves, checking the jars of essence, straightening them, making small adjustments. Then she moved to the loom and the spinning wheel, running her hands over them with affection, with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to them. "Rest well today. Tonight we will work again." She moved to the window and opened it wider, letting in the fresh morning air. It smelled of earth and growing things, of sunshine warming the forest, of the day establishing itself. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs, and then let the breath out slowly, releasing with it any remaining tiredness, any lingering sense of night. She turned and looked across the cottage to where the traveler still slept in the rocking chair. She watched them for a long moment, her expression tender, knowing. She had seen this before many times, the deep sleep that comes after a night in the cottage, the profound rest that the body and soul drink in like water after long thirst. She moved quietly to the small kitchen area and began to prepare tea. She filled the kettle with fresh water from a ceramic jug and hung it over the hearth, where she had already begun to rebuild the fire, just a small one, enough to heat water, no more. She selected herbs from her collection, chamomile for peace, mint for gentle awakening, a touch of honey for sweetness. As she worked, she hummed softly, the same wordless melody she had hummed during the night, and the sound filled the cottage with quiet contentment. The water heated slowly. The traveler slept on. The morning grew fuller. And the dream weaver moved about her gentle morning tasks with the same mindful attention she brought to everything, honoring the transition from night to day, from sleep to waking, from dream to reality. When the tea was ready, she poured it into 2 cups and carried one to the table, setting it down where the traveler would see it when they woke. Then she took her own cup and moved to the window, where she stood looking out at the forest, at the light moving through the trees, at the day beginning. She did not rush the traveler. She did not call to them or try to wake them. She simply waited, patient and present, knowing that they would wake when they were ready, when their body had taken all the rest it needed. And after a time, minutes or perhaps an hour, time had grown fluid again. The traveler began to stir. It started with a breath, slightly deeper than the others. Then a small movement of the fingers. The eyelids fluttered. The head turned slightly. And then slowly, gently, the eyes began to open. The traveler blinked in the soft light, confused at first, not quite remembering where they were. They saw the cottage around them, the shelves of jars, the loom, the spinning wheel, and slowly, like a dream remembered, the night came back to them. The dream weaver, the spinning, the weaving, the dreams released into the night sky. They sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in their body, but also the profound sense of rest, of having slept more deeply than they had in longer than they could remember. The blanket slipped from their lap, and they looked down at it, then around the cottage, and finally their eyes found the dream weaver standing at the window. She turned and smiled at them, warm and welcoming. "Good morning," she said softly. "You slept well." It was not a question but a statement, a knowing. The traveler nodded, feeling the truth of it in their bones. "There is tea," the dream weaver said, gesturing to the table. "When you are ready." The traveler rose slowly from the chair, their legs unsteady at first, and moved to the table. They picked up the cup and wrapped their hands around it, feeling its warmth, breathing in the fragrant steam. They sipped slowly, and the tea was sweet and soothing, easing the transition from sleep to waking, from dream to day. The dream weaver came and sat across from them, her own cup in hand. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, drinking their tea, watching the morning light move across the cottage walls. Finally, the traveler spoke, their voice soft and still slightly rough with sleep. "Thank you," they said. "For last night. For everything." The dream weaver inclined her head. "It was my gift to give," she said simply, "and yours to receive. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked." She set down her cup and looked at the traveler with those kind, knowing eyes. "You came here because you needed rest. Because your mind would not be quiet. Because sleep had become something to fear rather than something to welcome. Is that not so?" The traveler nodded, feeling tears prick at their eyes. "And now?" the dream weaver asked gently. The traveler thought about it, searching inside themselves. They felt different, lighter, softer. The knot of anxiety that had lived in their chest for so long had loosened, had perhaps even dissolved. They felt rested in a way that went beyond the physical, rested in their soul. "Now I feel at peace," they said quietly. The dream weaver smiled. "Good," she said. "That is good. Take this feeling with you. Remember it. And when the nights grow difficult again, when your mind begins to race and sleep feels impossible, remember this cottage. Remember that peace is possible. Remember how to rest." She rose and moved to a small shelf near the door, and from it she took something small, wrapped in soft cloth. She returned to the table and placed it in the traveler's hands. "A gift," she said, "for your journey home." The traveler unwrapped the cloth carefully and found inside a small sachet, similar to the ones that hung from the beams, filled with dried lavender and chamomile and other herbs they could not name. It smelled exactly like the cottage, like peace itself. "Keep this by your bed," the dream weaver said. "Let its scent remind you of this place, of this night, of the rest you found here. And know that you can always return. The path through the woods is always there for those who need it. You need only walk with a quiet heart, and your feet will remember the way." The traveler clutched the sachet, overwhelmed with gratitude, with a sense of having been given something precious beyond measure. They stood, and the dream weaver stood with them, and without words they embraced, a gentle, brief embrace that held within it all the warmth of the night, all the care that had been given and received. When they parted, the dream weaver walked the traveler to the door. She opened it, and the morning light spilled in, bright and warm and welcoming. The forest beyond was alive with green and birdsong, and the path was clearly visible, winding away between the trees. "Go gently," the dream weaver said, "and sleep well tonight and all the nights to come." The traveler stepped out onto the soft grass. then turned back for one last look at the cottage, at the dream weaver standing in the doorway, at this place that had given them such a gift. "I will remember," they said. "I will always remember." The dream weaver nodded. "I know," she said, "and I will be here weaving dreams night after night, for you and for all who need them." She raised her hand in farewell, and the traveler raised theirs in return. Then they turned and began to walk down the path, the sachet clutched in their hand, the memory of the night held carefully in their heart. Behind them, the dream weaver stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching them go. Then she stepped back inside and closed the door gently. The cottage settled into its daytime quiet. The dream weaver moved about, tidying, preparing, resting. And already, though the sun was still climbing toward noon, she was thinking ahead to evening, to nightfall, to the moment when darkness would return, and she would light the lanterns once more, sit down at her spinning wheel, and begin again the sacred work of weaving dreams. For there would always be those who could not sleep, those whose minds would not quiet, those who needed the gift of peaceful rest. And for them, the dream weaver would be here, patient and faithful, spinning threads of starlight and moonbeam, weaving peace into fabric, releasing dreams into the night sky to find those who needed them most. Night after night, dream after dream, forever and always. This is the way it has always been. This is the way it will always be. And in this knowing, there is peace. Sleep well, dear dreamer. Sleep well. The end. May you carry the peace of the dream weaver's cottage with you into your own dreams.